Welcome to the Language Alchemy Podcast, and thank you for joining me today. This is your host, Alejandra, a transformative communication teacher and coach who is devoted to helping multicultural individuals, change agents, and couples engaged in personal growth transform their lives and relationships through conscious communication. Today, we are going to learn a lot about what it takes to cultivate meaningful friendships when we're able to have healthy conversations about difficult topics. This episode is part 2 of my conversation with Kawthar Duncan, who is an educator, an immigrant from the Middle East, and a daughter of Muslim parents, and with Noam Szoke, who's also an educator and an immigrant from Israel who has Jewish ancestors. I met Noam because he brought me to the San Francisco Dharma Collective to teach conscious communication and meditation, and he has attended many language alchemy workshops. I hope you were able to listen to episode 155, in which Noam and Kawthar share their immigration stories. In this part of the conversation, we talk about how they were able to discuss the war in Gaza and their different perspectives with humanity. So without further ado, let's go to the conversation. You had been friends for several years. You were close. How did it come about that you started having a different conversation with each other that centered around your identities, your histories, and then when we had October 7th, 2023 happen? How did that unfold for you?
You want to go first, Noam?
After October 7th, I don't know, within a couple of days, Kawthar contacted me and just said, "How is your family? How are you?" Which seems like a very normal human thing to do, but it touched me so deeply. The writing was on the wall, the violence was going to happen. Yeah, it was precisely because it was a human thing to do. And I have other friends who didn't even know what to say. Kawthar knew what to say. "I'm thinking of you. I hope your family is okay."
And was your family okay, Noam?
Yeah, my family was and is mostly okay. I have some extended family that's been unable to be in their homes since October 7th because it's too dangerous, and who have friends and neighbors who were killed and or kidnapped, but no one in my immediate family.
Yeah. And Kawthar, you heard Noam say that when he was young, he heard Arabs are not our friends, Arabs are our enemies, until his father said, well, Arabs are our cousins. Did you grow up hearing messages about Israelis?
Not that I remember. What I remember post 9/11 very, very clearly is when I went to college. That's when I was around people of different ethnicities, religious backgrounds, even though my college wasn't that far from Dearborn. But still, I think it's just something about the college experience just makes you be around more diverse group of people. And actually, in the midst of the United States invading Iraq and Afghanistan, the organization at the college where I went was doing a lot of work to bring peace, was actually a Jewish student organization. And then they partnered up with the Muslim Student Association and do all these different events about peace and bringing people together and not having war be the answer to what's happening. I just remember feeling like they're a part of our family and they understood what I was feeling and going through without me having to say anything, because they have history and family that might have experienced Holocaust. And obviously there were things happening as I was growing up in Israel and Palestine that I just don't remember. And when I moved to San Francisco, I never felt like there was ever tension or lack of understanding. The messages are different depending on the family that you grow up with. But I met Noam, and we also have another friend who's also Jewish that was part of the math department. There was always the conversation of we need peace between Israel and Palestine. And I've always felt like anytime I came across someone who was Jewish, that was always the message, that we need peace, we can all coexist. And I remember Noam would tell me stories about when he would go to Israel and say, like, everyone is just going about their day. There's no conflict. It doesn't seem like there's a fight. I don't know if you remember saying to me one time when you went to Israel, and I was like, so how is it? Is it like what people say it is? But, you know, post October 7th, I've definitely have had a different experience. And that's something I have talked to Noam about and have asked him to help me process and understand. People that have BLM on their windows and Black Lives Matter were one of the first ones to say, this is the cost of war, and it doesn't matter what the casualties are in Gaza, because that's what happens. And you need to just accept that's what happens. And to me, I think it's just like that shock of, these are people that I thought were like-minded. We don't think the war is the answer, but suddenly they did feel like that was the answer. So I'm still processing and trying to understand when that language is being used, that this is the cost of war. And this is what happens when a country has to defend itself.
So you leaned into your closest trusted cousin, Jewish friend, to have understanding rather than unload all your grievances about how people were thinking and feeling and what they were saying about the war. You went to him with some openness.
Yeah.
How was it for you, Noam, to receive these questions from Kawthar?
Some of my first feelings after October 7th, after Israel started bombing Gaza, would be a sense of guilt. It's evolved a lot in the years, sadly. And to explain it is to say that when I was a kid in Israel, I remember very clearly me and my friends would say to each other, these adults are out of their minds. How can they be continually fighting and thinking that's going to solve anything? When we're adults, there'll be peace. You know, when we're adults, we'll have figured this all out. So this feeling of we did not, and it's not like I didn't know that before October 7th, but I think to some extent, I was going along with what Israelis have been doing for 70 years, is just pretending that everything's okay, that this is sustainable, not because they don't know what harm they're causing, although there is limited coverage of that, but because there's no leadership to bring peace. So the things that Israelis are doing to a large extent, and I think the things that Kawthar saw people doing, I think they're coming out of a place of mortal fear. Like, if I feel like my life is in danger, I do things that I wouldn't otherwise do. It's, of course, much more complicated than that, but I don't think I could explain anything to Kawthar, but we could process it together. That's really what we've been doing this year, is when we get together, we basically share our grief with each other without need for comparison or hierarchies. Grief is grief.
Tell us about that process in which you have engaged this whole year of getting together and explicitly telling each other you wanted to have conversations about the war in Gaza and your feelings and your grief. What did you find along the way in these conversations?
I can start this one, Noam. It's been good. Like I said, post October 7th, when I saw people that, and I still respect them, but just seeing what their response was kind of like shocked me. These are people that are my age, have young kids. And I felt like that lack, not seeing that this is someone else's child is now dead, not having that empathy and grief for that parent, regardless of their cultural and religious backgrounds. I was trying to understand how one can see death and be just like, that is just what happens, and that's the cost of war. Initially, I think for probably both Noam and I, we would go on walks and the emotions were just heightened. I felt a lot of grief for Gaza. I'm not Palestinian. I grew up in Iran and Syria, where I was growing up. There was war. I remember it as a child. I don't want that. And to know what was happening and what still continues to happen in Gaza is just overwhelming grief. And because I have young kids, I don't know how anyone can see that. And I feel just a little bit that there's a parent that is trying to protect their kid or has lost their child. And that's, for everyone. I don't feel that grief for just Palestinians. I feel it for the Israelis. I feel it for the Ukrainians. I don't wish it on anyone. I don't want to see it in our world. I don't want my kids to have it in their lifetime. And I think there came a point where I felt like I just needed that space, and I needed to talk to someone that I knew understood. That I didn't have to be like, I'm sorry for Hamas. I didn't need to say any of that for Noam. He just knew, and I didn't need to explain anything. And I can just sit in that grief and just randomly text him. And Noam can tell you how often I do that, where I just tell him, like, I'm sitting at a light because I'm overwhelmed with so much grief for these families that I have to just pull over and cry. Text someone and tell them. And for Noam on the other end, just to be like, yeah, I know. Not to ask me questions or anything, and just to sit in that grief with me, or not to be met with, well, what about the hostages? I feel grief for them too. I do. It's just been a year of this loss of human life. The only way forward is peace. It is peace, but it seems like it's so far away, so far away.
Yeah, especially now with the current attacks and developments and expansions of wars. I hear how heartbreaking this has been for you, Kawthar, and how your friend, Noam, was able to accompany you in your heartbreak.
Yeah.
And that's what we can do when we communicate with one another consciously. We don't try to fix the heartbreak. We don't try to give advice. We don't try to minimize it, compare it to other people's heartbreaks, or bring information that goes to the head but not through the heart, but just really accompany the other in our heartbreaks. How about for you, Noam? How has it been for you to have these conversations, texts, and talk with your dear Arab cousin about what's been going on, given that you grew up in Israel, a place where when you were children, you dreamt with other kids about having peace?
Yeah, I was telling a friend the other day that I don't know how I would have made it through this year whole and as okay as I am without Kawthar, the person who I've been able to talk to most honestly this year and most forthrightly, because she's done the same thing for me that she described. Hear my grief and meet it as a friend would, without judging it or comparing it or asking for explanations. And not just the grief, but the guilt I've described and the confusion. I've had a difficult year interacting with my family in Israel and walking that line of sometimes feeling like mad at them, and then other times realizing the extent of the hell that they're experiencing without comparing it to the hell that someone in Gaza is experiencing, because it's all hell. Kawthar's friendship and wisdom have meant the world to me this year. Being able to talk to her has helped me find light in the world about this. I would read the media and it would just be horrific, the way people talk about it. I've found organizations and people who are speaking about this in a way that I can absorb and get behind. And it's really because of what Kawthar and I have been doing that I know what to look for, because there are other people doing the same thing, basically, as it's just talking to each other without blame, finger pointing. And there are things to blame, but the blame is a reason to pivot. It's not a reason to continue hurting each other. That doesn't solve anything.
I'm just so moved by both of you. As you started saying in the beginning of this conversation, there are differences and there are lots of similarities. And you have been able to bring together your human similarities with love, compassion, humanity, and that similar humanity is what has held this together for both of you. I'm sure that it made your friendship even stronger, more intimate, deeper than it ever was. Yeah. So you both nodding. And along the way, did you have disagreements? Did you have moments of big tension where you didn't know how to respond to the other?
I don't think so. When we did hold a small, what do we call those? Not a listening session. What was it?
I don't know what we called it. We didn't have a name yet. Like expanding our circle.
Yeah, like a grief circle. Maybe we called it like a grief circle. And one of Noam's friend, who is Jewish, said, hey, when I talk to my family, they seem to be upset when the comment like free Palestine or free Gaza is made. And they say, well, I don't understand what that means. You know, they're free, they're fine. We gave them where they needed to be. I felt like it was more like when these statements or questions came up in our grief circle that we've held a few times. I was able to explain from my perspective as an Arab and who is friends with many Palestinians whose families are in the West Bank and in Gaza. What does it mean when they say free Gaza or free Palestine? And there's probably vice versa. The big thing that I know early on came up from the river to the sea. And we were processing, what does that mean to an Arab when they say that, from the river to the sea? And how is Noam interpreting that? And how is his family in Israel interpreting that? And how everything is open to interpretation.
Yes, and you know, this is a beautiful moment to say, so from your perspective and your understanding and your communication with Palestinians and other Arab friends, what is the interpretation given to free Palestine and from the river to the sea? And then I want to ask the same question to you, Noam.
From their perspective, and I've explained this to Noam and our friend, is they want to be able to just live without being controlled, with their water and food source is controlled by Israel. Their movement within even Gaza and to work in Israel is so restrictive. I'm not in Israel, so I don't know all the rules, but there's certain protocols and checkpoints, and that gives a sense of not safety and not trusting that we can coexist together. I didn't really understand the phrase, and I had heard it before, Gaza is an open air prison. I've never really understood that when I would read it up until post October 7th and what started happening, and me looking into the phrases and asking my Palestinian friends, how have your parents or family members experienced living in the West Bank and living in Gaza? And their experience is, it literally feels like we live in prison. To them, this is what it means. Like, let us govern ourselves, trust that we know how to do it.
Thank you, Kawthar. And how about you, Noam, from someone who was born and raised in Israel? What do those phrases, from the river to the sea, free Palestine, mean to people in Israel? You still have family there. What's the interpretation there?
The main thing I want to say is people want to live in safety. People don't want to feel like they're about to be attacked. And I say people because we're talking about all the people who are in Israel, Palestine now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The combination of segregation, confinement, rules, regulations, and worse, especially in the West Bank, people's homes just get willy-nilly demolished. The things that Palestinians have lived with for the past 70 years, not to mention the Nakba to begin with, being just sent away from their homes, this is a different level of fear and insecurity and horror and violence. And yet, Israelis also don't want to live with fear and insecurity. Nobody does. They don't want to feel like they're about to be attacked, which is the way it has been for as long as Israel has existed. And the particular phrase, from the river to the sea, has an implication when you juxtapose it with organizations whose mission is to annihilate Israel, that we're talking about evicting all Jews from Israel. The Jews aren't going anywhere. The Palestinians aren't going anywhere. They're either going to live there side by side fighting forever, or they're going to live side by side in peace somehow.
Yeah.
What piece of advice do you have for people who have friends who are different from them, whether they're Arabs, they're Israelis, they're Jewish, they're Muslims. I understand not all Israelis are Jewish, not all Arabs are Muslims, but some people get confused with that. People who have different religions, different ideas about the world. What piece of advice would you have for friends who want to learn how to have these very important conversations with each other and maintain and even deepen their friendships?
The first thing that came to mind, and I think about just like how Noam and I have approached this, is just listening to understand. It's not listening to be understood. Going into any conversation with people of different backgrounds, religious backgrounds, like it's just listening to understand. I think you can do a lot with just coming with that intention.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Listening with an open heart. And if you find yourself being reactive, then stop and notice that that's a human being telling you what they're going through. You have to keep the humanity in it or bring it back if it gets lost. There are a handful of organizations that are doing amazing work in this arena. And can I mention them?
Please.
Yeah, so there's one called Standing Together. There's one called Combatants for Peace. There's one called Bereaved Families Forum, a place for Jews and Arabs who have lost family members because of violence, inter-group violence, to come together and talk to each other.
Thank you. So I will find those organizations and I will add the links in the show notes so that if you're interested, you can go and check them out. Well, Kawthar, Noam, thank you so much for your exquisite humanity, your open hearts, and for being here with me and being willing to share this with others and how to talk to people who are seemingly different, but they're just human beings having their experiences. I really love this conversation. I feel like we could have part 3, 5, 10 of this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
You did very much. Love you, Kawthar. Talk
Love
soon.
you too, Noam. All right. Talk soon.
And if you, like Noam or Kawthar, want to be able to have important conversations with love, with compassion and understanding with others, and be able to redirect your reactivity, then I want to invite you to an 8-week online course that's starting soon on November 10th. The course is called Choosing True Connection. Tools to communicate authentically without losing your cool, taking it personally, or giving up on the people in your life. If you would like more information or to sign up, go to languagealchemy.com/enroll. Thank you so much for listening. Until next episode. And as we say in Argentina, ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Original music by Gary Lapoe. You can find all links in the show notes at languagealchemy.com.